There's this pervasive view in society that is something like we shouldn't reproduce because the future is bad, we broke it, and humans are part of the problem. So it kind of takes two paths. One is like overpopulation's coming, um, and yeah, we need to reduce humans. And then the other side is like the future is going to be so bad. How could you ever put a child through such a horrible situation? Okay, package that up, hold it really tightly in both your hands, make that into a little ball, and throw that into the garbage and never think like that again. I'm deadly serious. This is absolute garbage. Okay. And it's widely held. It's all over the place. They diagnose kids or teenagers with climate disorder. They're like so scared of the future. That makes me incredibly sad. Young people are supposed to be optimistic and ideological to a fault. They need to wake up every day and be like, bro, I can change the world. And they need to deeply believe that, and they need to try. Most will fail, but few succeed, and the few that succeed push society forward. That is the cycle.
Okay, we are live, my friends. Back with another return guest. We have Brandon Quittem back in the house. Last time we talked a lot about fungi, which was super interesting. I thought that was super fascinating, and I was really excited to get that out there because that's such a different angle on Bitcoin than most people really think about, just bringing nature into it. And today we're going to talk about this other theme that you really talk about. I like how you sort of bounce around between a few of these different really important topics out there. And those are kind of like, you have a few different pillars you like to really stand on and, talk about these different things. And what we're doing today is the fourth turning. And you had a lot of really great work on this. You've done a lot of podcasts on this. So I'm really excited to talk about. Brandon, thank you for joining me again, sir.
Hey, thank you, Ben. Happy to be here. And wait, you're telling me that everyone doesn't view Bitcoin as a living organism?
Not yet. That's what we got to work on. We're
We
getting
do have
there.
to work on that. And one other comment before we get into the fourth turning, you made a comment like I bounced around to some certain pillars of ideas or whatever. Yes, absolutely true. I'm a perpetual rabbit hole dweller, which I think many early Bitcoiners are. Not that I'm that early, 2017 class, but the earlier you go, the more people get obsessive and they fall down in these little niche topics and try to find the bottom of the rabbit hole, which I don't think exists, but it's fun to try to find it.
Yeah, there are just so many out there, and I'm definitely in that place myself. That's one of the reasons why I started a podcast, because I want to just like explore all these different things. And I also decided to not put Bitcoin in the name of the podcast because I knew I was just going to go on all sorts of crazy things that were not about Bitcoin. And I know there are some Bitcoin podcasts out there that are now changing their name, like Peter McCormack, for example. It was What Bitcoin Did for a while, and he switched it to Mr. Obnoxious, I'm assuming just to kind of make it more general. Because it's impossible to stay in this Bitcoin box, because as there is so much to explore within just Bitcoin, it just expands your horizons in such a way that you want to explore all these other things with the Bitcoin lens, but not just talk about Bitcoin. So it's amazing how it does that.
100%. Yeah, you fall down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, you put on your orange tinted glasses, and you can't help yourself. Whether it's Thanksgiving dinner with your family and you just inject Bitcoin, or yeah, you read a new book and the new book has an
Always
idea.
without consent. You just put it in there.
Exactly.
All of our families think we're insane now. It's okay. We love it.
Exactly.
So the fourth turning. This is a very interesting subject, and I love listening to you talk about it on all the other podcasts you've done on this topic. So could you give us just an overview on what these turning cycles are? Like, what are they? What are each of the turnings that we should know about? And then we'll sort of transition into, how this applies to real life today, and then later on Bitcoin.
Yeah, let's do it. So, The Fourth Turning was a book published in the late 90s by Neil Howe and Bill Strauss. These were historians, demographer types who had written a few books prior, and they mostly focused on American history, and they went very deep. And what they found is they found that there's these recurring patterns that keep coming up in American history. And they ultimately define what they call the generational theory of history. And that's kind of what the fourth turning was focused on. And what they found is that every 80 to 90 years, society essentially rebuilds all the institutions that keep us going. And they say, well, that's weird. Why do we do that? And the deeper they go, they found that there were 4 archetypal generations that would repeat in order. So every generation's like 20 to 25 years. And the people born in that cohort in that age group, they essentially are all born during the same context. So the world around them shapes that group. And then they grow up, they leave the home, they go out in the real world, again, bumping in with their peers. And they essentially forge the identity of that cohort. Then that cohort grows up and they start to impact the world in a way that's somewhat predictable, and they're all kind of the same because they're influenced. So they're kind of forged that in the same way. And then depending on what age that cohort is, they have a different impact on society. So if you're a child, you're really just learning and absorbing the world. If you're a young adult, you're out there, you're idealistically trying to change the world. You're the ones who go to war. You're kind of like the soldiers for the elder groups. And then you have that like 40 to 60 age. You're in your prime, you have most of the power, and then you have the final late stage of life where you're sort of imparting wisdom on the next generation. So it's a very human life-based cycle. The full cycle is roughly 1 human life. And also you can kind of look at this through other cyclical things in our society, like the seasons, spring, summer, fall, winter. The moon is on a cycle for our months. The year cycle is the solar cycle, right? And there's all these other things. And so using this framework, the authors have identified certain ways to sort of predict the outcomes that we will see in society. It's not like a horoscope thing. It's not a precise prediction mechanism. Some people call it like horoscopes for intellectuals, which I think is a good critique if you're like knee deep. But the deeper you go, I truly believe that these are embedded human cycles into like our biology plus society creates these cycles. And I don't think we can really do much to get away from them. So that's kind of the super high level. And I found this during 2020, the world shutting down, COVID lockdowns. I'm getting pissed off. Like, what is going on? Why are people acting this way? Why are we all bending the knee to a corrupt government or an incapable government or both? And this book sort of explained the reaction that the humans had to this catastrophe or this crisis or whatever you want to call it. And I think that's the right way to think about it. It predicts the response, or it predicts the mood of the society. And if you understand the mood, you can kind of understand how we will respond to different catalysts. Okay, so the different archetypes are hero, artist, prophet, nomad. Okay, so if you are you're a millennial, which I am. You're considered a hero generation.
Okay.
And if you're a boomer, you're the prophet generation. The prophets are like...
Yeah, give us a quick overview of each one. So millennials, hero. Does it have like a quick blip there for what that means?
Yeah. So millennials and the hero generation are community-based. They're not very individualistic. So we kind of grew up in the 90s where it's like, we're all on the same team. Here's a 13th place ribbon. You're all special.
Participation awards, yeah.
Yeah. And we kind of grew up being like, well, that doesn't seem fair. What's good for we kind of think about the greater good more than other generations.
Okay.
If we go a little bit older than us, we have the Gen Xers. This is the nomad generation. Okay, the nomads are defined by a period of under-parenting. So in the late 70s or the 70s and the 80s mostly, really didn't pay attention to our kids. They ran around. They had a key by age like 4. They made their own food. This is like the Terminator movie kind of defines that world. Or the Goonies would be a good example of kids on their own adventure, right? Which is not even thinkable in the late 90s, right?
Yeah.
And then if you go older one more, you go back to the prophet archetype. So that would be the boomers. These folks, they were born during the end of World War II. So they were born in this incredible peacetime of stability and honestly boring culture. And so
no
what do
fiat
kids
money
do when they
printer
grow
yet,
up?
so things were going pretty well.
Things were going great when they were kids. But what do teenagers do? You get a little bit older and you start to push back on your parents' generation. You're like, what do you guys, where's the sex, drugs, and rock and roll? Woody Guthrie, what the hell? White picket fences. You guys are so boring. And so what happens? They create the civil rights movement, the psychedelic 60s. They create this incredible social change. And what's interesting in the fourth turning is that halfway through that 80 to 90 year cycle, we have the midpoint, and that midpoint is where we redo the interior world. That is the religious movements, that's the civil rights movements. So if you go back every 80 years for the last 500 years in the US, you have a religious movement. From the Puritans to the Transcendental movement to the Civil Rights era, right? You can look out through history, and it always falls in that period where the prophet archetype is coming of age. Okay, and the fourth turning, which is where we redo the institutions, that's defined by total war. Every single total war in the United States happened during a fourth turning, and every fourth turning had a total war. So they're linked. It doesn't, by definition, require a total war, but that should be our base case. We should be worried about that. And the reason is because the conditions are ripe for war. So, for example, in, I think, the early 1900s, the Germans sank the Lusitania. I think it was called Lusitania. They blew up a boat, and this easily could have led to war. However, we were in a third turning, so there's no cultural inertia to go to war. So we just sort of brushed it off. 20 years later, or maybe 30 years later, bombing of Pearl Harbor happened. Then what happened? Total war declared the next day. And so similar catalysts, dramatically different outcomes, right? So that's the difference between a third turning and the fourth turning, or any of these turnings. The mood changes, right? And sorry, I forgot one archetype, the artist. So these are the Gen Z kids. So they're born, and their childhood development is during a crisis. And our current fourth turning started in 2008, ends in, like, call it 2030, 2033, somewhere around there. And so these kids are born, all they know is chaos. So they're taught to go inward. They're not very confident. They're not very social. They are more artistic. They're kind of like forgotten and have a lot of emotional problems. The previous version was called the silent generation, to give you a comparison. Nobody knew about them.
So they were the last artist, and then we've come all the way back around to the new artists.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
Exactly. And so for the heroes, the previous hero generation before the millennials was the GIs. And the GI generation was all the soldiers in World War II. So our idealistic boomers during World War II sent the communitarian heroes to war. What does it kind of feel like now? It feels like the boomers, which are the same prophet that sent the kids to war in World War II, they don't want to let their investments go down. They want maximum entitlements. They want to lock out young people from housing. They don't care about wars abroad. They're do as I say, not as I do. They're they raped and pillaged and plundered the economy. I don't blame the individuals. The individuals are just acting in their own best interests and whatever. But as a cohort, they're very destructive, and they're not very forward thinking for the young people. So the hippies grew up and they became selfish yuppies, essentially. And so, that's where we are now. I don't know if there's any interjections there. I can keep going all day, but
that's so interesting. Did you mean World War I? I think you're talking about how, because the boomers were born after World War II. I think you're thinking like correct. The last, and they are the prophets, right? Was it the prophets before that? Were you talking about World War I when it was bringing people in? Or maybe I had that mixed up.
So the boomers are the prophets, and the last time we had a prophet generation, they were middle-aged during World War II.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and so what I'm trying to show the parallel of is we have the same constellation of archetypes in World War II as we do right now.
Yeah.
So the artists are children, the heroes are young adults, aka soldiers, the midlife people who have all the power are the prophets, and the prophets like going to war.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm gonna have to re-listen to all that, because I feel like there's so many like interesting cycles just in that little tidbit, which is crazy. How this just shows that humans really do run so cyclically. We don't even think about this. And I mean, there's whole other rabbit holes involved. Like, are there certain people involved in, starting these wars that knew this knowledge, and so they wanted to create this war to keep the war machine going, and they were aware that people were at a certain level where that archetype would be ready to support their war. That's a
Oh,
whole other side
interesting.
of things. Yeah.
Yeah, my instinct is to say that very few people are aware of these trends, and they don't weaponize them. I think
Hmm.
some people for sure do, but I have to assume it's more of a subconscious part of society. Um, a lot of people don't even know about the theory; they don't believe the theory, etc. Um, but yeah, I'm sure some do. The ones who are diabolical in some certain way, they would find this material and use it against us, I think.
Yeah, and on the flip side, if people are aware of this and know this, they have more of they're able to think outside of this and look at it more objectively and say, okay, we need to make sure that we don't fall into the dangerous part of the cycle. Like you said, like often war is the catalyst that is like always ready to blow at a certain time. Like, how do we zero in on that and make sure that we don't hit that? Because, like you
That's
said,
right.
it doesn't have to be a war that is this catalyst of this resetting. It could be something different. So, we
That's
could
right.
use that knowledge to prevent that from happening.
Yes, I think that's a very strong point. The way I would think about it is that chances for total war are the highest they've been in our lifetimes, and the highest they probably will be for our lifetimes. And so you said some other point that was interesting where it's like, I'll just skip your point, but the takeaway was no one alive today remembers World War II,
Hmm. Yeah.
essentially, right? And so what does that tell us? It's like we can't have total war if some generation remembers it because we remember how bad it is, and you sort of pass that wisdom on. But now we're 4 generations away. We are, right. So essentially, we don't have any real understanding of what World War II is like.
Hmm.
In fact, our grandparents are more like the products of post-war America. So yeah, it's very different. And so, what does that tell us? Well, every 100 years, we better learn our history. Otherwise, we're going
Yeah.
to do this again and again and again, which apparently we don't have a problem doing.
And it's tough because there's so much noise out there around these events. And, you know, like you said, we're almost 100 years since World War II. What is it, like 80 something years? And that's so much time for the story of it to be spun up in all sorts of different manipulative ways through the media and the movies and history books, which we all know now have the fiat tentacles deeply inside them and different forces within there that want to have a certain story because, as we know, the winners write the history books. So there's lots of weird things going on, and it's just becoming more and more important for people to really do the first principles research. And I think that where do you think that the flow of information comes into this? Because I think that we want to make sure people have this knowledge, and there are a lot of noisemakers out there sort of obfuscating it. How important do you think it is that we fix the media landscape by, I would say, just like chopping out corporate media and going more decentralized, independent, like a living organism, as you always talk about, having independent podcasters and writers and filmmakers and all these sort of people creating this informational content away from those fiat ties.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. If we want to believe that we're in some sort of a democracy, representative democracy, republic, whatever it is, if we want to believe that individuals have some way to influence our politics, we definitely need an information landscape that supports healthy digestion of reality, right? And I think that it's a really interesting time to have this conversation because we just had the 2024 presidential election, which I think is very clearly the first like podcast election. Maybe there's a better phrase for it, but I think
I
new
think that's pretty
media.
good, man. I feel like that played a
Yeah,
huge part in it. Like, I remember
yeah,
watching just as these decisions were being made in those final weeks coming up to election day, where Trump had, or Joe Rogan rather, had Trump, JD Vance, and Elon all basically supporting Trump within a few weeks. Like getting over 100 million views just on YouTube. Who knows how many podcast downloads? That had hundreds of millions. And meanwhile, Kamala is like, no, I'm going to stick with the corporate media and talk to like 100,000 boomers. And so I feel like that played a huge part in it. It had to have, like, a massive part.
100%. And I think it brings in a really interesting theme or principle here that ties to Bitcoin, ties to fourth turning, ties to media, which is trust. And so if we look over the last 100 years, we're at the rock bottom trusts in institutions in the last 100 years. And so we're really looking back at post 1929, Great Depression, financial collapse, FDR steps in. That's the last parallel to where we are now. And in that period, we made radical changes. I mean, the only way to make radical changes is if the people are supportive of it, right? So I think we had the roaring 20s, debauchery, then we had the stock market collapse, and we had the Dust Bowls in the early 30s. People were starving. Nobody trusted the government. Nobody trusted banks, right? So FDR came in with a wildly different premise on how to do this thing. He created deficit spending for the first time. He created unemployment insurance. Oh, you lose your job, don't worry, the government's got you. Oh, how about Social Security? If you work hard for your life, we'll take care of you end of life. FDIC, don't worry, the banks won't go under, right? You can see this whole bouquet of new policy that was in response to the mood at the time. And if you tried to implement those policies 10 years earlier, 20 years earlier, you would have been laughed out of the building because society wasn't ready for it. Society didn't acknowledge the fact that large change was needed. Okay, so the 1920s are similar to the 1990s and the early aughts. We don't really, it's still going pretty good, but we're starting to deregulate. We're starting to sow the seeds of financial collapse and loss of trust, but they haven't really materialized yet. We're just pulling the foundation out and it's becoming more fragile, but the building's still standing, so nobody's upset, right? Then we have the '08 financial collapse that mirrors 1929, and then we transition into the fourth turning. People say, well, how is this possible? Real estate in America, it only goes up. I can't trust you anymore. Well, why did they bail out the banks and not Main Street, right? And you can kind of see how this trust is being eroded. And then all the politicians flip. In the 90s, the politicians minimize the pain. They say, oh, things are great. Don't worry about that. Look over here. And then you have '08 onwards, and what are you seeing? You have hope and change from Obama. You've got Make America Great Again, which implies things are not good now, right? So you start to see the slogan shift, and politicians weaponize and they underline the fact that things aren't good because that's an effective strategy to gain votes. And so that's the climate we're in now. And so if trust is down, that includes media, healthcare, the government, schools, pretty much anything we don't trust. Why would we trust the mainstream media? Now we have the internet and we can fact check them in real time. We can see how much they lie to us, again, spiraling the trust. And so you have the rise of independent media. And I think this was the first time that it hit the highest echelons, right? If no one cares if you're watching Joe Rogan about aliens and primates and UFC, but as soon as you choose Joe Rogan over CNN for politics, it matters, right? And so I think, I think the Democrats will never say no to another Joe Rogan invite ever again. And I'm glad they got absolutely wrecked. They deserved it. One more angle on trust, and I come from the left, and I voted for Trump in 2024 proudly, but I came from the left, and they deserve to lose. What they did around hiding Biden's cognitive decline, not having a primary, they pretty much just don't respect their voters, and they think they're above their voters, and they think they can lie and get away with whatever they want. And they got shellacked for it. And again, why would you trust them if they act this way and they treat you with so little respect? And so again, it's very obvious to predict that honesty, transparency, even if you're way off and you're kind of unpolished, we eat it up. And that's a symptom of the times, and I expect it to continue for a while. That being said, a well-run society does have strong institutions. Okay, Bitcoiners don't like this as much. And to soften my stance, it doesn't mean we need a strong government. It just means we need social institutions that decrease friction in society. That's the whole point. Property rights, decreases friction, allows us to focus on productive things because we know the base fundamental property rights of our money and our property or whatever are taken care of. That allows us to scale social interactions in a way that makes wealth, that grows the pie, grows the wealth pie for everyone. And so in a future world, what we're looking for now in the next, let's say 5 or 10 years is we're trying to figure out how to rebuild our institutions, what changes we're going to make. And we want institutions that'll carry us for the next 80 years. And so things to think about would be, do we change our political regime? Do we change our information diet? Do we change the geopolitical balance? It sure feels like it. Trump's like, we're renaming the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf America. Canada and Mexico, you're with us. Greenland, how about that too? So we're starting to see the rumbles. We obviously have Ukraine and Russia to keep an eye on. Taiwan's a hotbed. The Middle East is a hotbed. Israel wants to like take over the region, and we're like kind of supportive for some reason. And so there's a lot of risks around the world. I will say one last point is like, where does this thing climax? Because it's not known yet. Is total war abroad, just touched on that. I used to think COVID was going to be the climax. And then I realized that it divided us even worse. And it was mostly a scam. So, okay, that's not going to unite us. So we need something to unite us because we have this collective instinct that it's time to make big change. Usually total war is the only thing that gets us to unite. However, I will say, since Trump created this coalition across all the aisles and Elons and Tulsi's and all these different folks,
RFK was a big one too.
RFK, massive, yeah. That's never happened before in my lifetime, at least. Definitely didn't happen in 2016. And so to me, we have a potential situation where we're actually going to unite the country. The Trump derangement syndrome people will never, they'll probably be broken forever. But I think the 80% of the Democrats have it in them to see this in positive light. And I tweeted this week, but number go up is going to heal the political divide. I honestly believe that. So if we just make the economy shift towards it gets a little bit better each year instead of getting worse, which has been happening for a while for the average person, I think a lot of people will overlook his style, which people don't like. Fair enough. He's got a flagrant style. But hey, I think he's the right guy for the job. And I think we do need unity here to minimize the risk of civil war, because if we did not have, if we didn't have a step in the right direction on the local climate here in the U.S., I think civil war in the U.S. was a very high chance.
Yeah, and I think I care even less about Trump himself, but I think that like the ideas that are being sort of brought up around the conservative side are what people are really attaching themselves to. Like, to me, like I respect Joe Rogan a lot. I love like the way he thinks and the way he asks questions about everything. I resonate more with him than someone like Trump, who's actually going to be president, because I think that there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of, different ideas flowing around, but there are certain topics within the political side, the two tribes that we have right now, the ones that are on the right are becoming more and more attractive to people because it's becoming clearer and clearer that we need to just cut out the woke bullshit and look at reality. Because I think a lot of that really blurs reality and is trying to force unnatural things into reality all the time. And more people are saying, like, I'm just not buying that. I'm not, we need to fix the problems that are happening. Like you said, because everyone agrees, even the politicians are basing their campaigns around, like, things are not great right now, we need to fix it. But one side is saying, like, oh, we just need to, like, go woke even harder. And the other side is saying, like, no, we need to, like, draw some hard lines here, even if it hurts people's feelings. And that's kind of the way that I view it. Do you view it similar to that?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the other angle here is that I think woke as a idea complex is entirely a luxury belief, meaning that you can only waste energy on that if you are so well taken care of materially and your parents pay for your liberal arts degree and you just don't have anything to do. You have no purpose. So you more or less invent a war or a cause to generate meaning out of that's totally in your head. And there's a reason why the majority of the woke warriors are like trust fund babies who graduated from NYU, right, as an archetype. They're overwhelmingly represented in the Ivies, etc. You go to a developing country or any country, call it a median country in terms of economics, And there's no such thing as woke. It's not even an idea. It's laughable to think about because they have bigger problems. And I think part of what's going on with the woke thing is one, it got too extreme. And the more extreme you go, the easier it is to knock it down. That's one. But two, if you can't buy eggs to feed your family, then the 49th gender that we came up with this year all of a sudden doesn't matter as much because you're hungry, right? And so I think physics took over here, and our luxury beliefs, we can't afford those luxury beliefs as much as we once could. I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is we were under this, I'll just say like woke oppression, although that word's probably a little bit overstated. Let me try to say what I mean here, which is that it was a high social cost to speak out against these ideas. And speaking out, you lost your job, you lost your friends, polite company doesn't want to invite you to dinner parties anymore, right? So even though the ideas were held by a small percentage, the middle ground of people on both sides just decided to keep their mouth shut and keep their head down so they don't get crushed by it. And then what happened was all of a sudden the tide shifted. It became socially okay, primarily due to Elon Musk and peers around him during this election. Honestly, they said, hey guys, it's okay. We're not doing this anymore. And then all of a sudden, one by one, you saw everyone flip. And so essentially people were lying about their preferences, and then it became socially acceptable to share your real opinion. And then everyone's like, oh yeah, that's bullshit. I've always thought it was bullshit. And that's where we are now. And so it's an interesting lesson, right? Sometimes you can have a social movement that appears to be really large. And the reason it appears to be large is because most people are just being quiet about it. And I think that's very interesting. So maybe we ask ourselves right now, I haven't thought about this, so I don't have anything on the top of my head, but what preference do we see out in the market today that we believe is very strong, but in reality, it's only held by a tiny percentage of people? Because that'd be a really good thing to bet on, right? We're talking about Bitcoin, we're talking about markets. I just like thinking about these things socially. What's the next paradigm shift to flip? So it's like, where are we falsifying our preferences, and how can you bet on that change ahead of time? That'd be interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that really just perked my ears up there is when you're talking about how there is a really big cost to speaking out against the ridiculousness and the wokeness that I think that we've all sort of seen it sort of shifting in that direction, and thinking like this is a little bit crazy. Like it's starting to, even like you said you came from the left, I came from the left also, but everyone hits a threshold where we're starting to think like, is this really okay? Is this, shipping in millions and millions of immigrants that hate us? Maybe this isn't a great idea. Uh, and we're told, oh, it's racist if you question that. Like, you're a racist if you think that maybe this isn't a good idea. Meanwhile, every single other country in the world, it's totally normal for them to want to protect their culture, but we're not allowed to because we're white. It's like this is like a whole crazy rabbit hole I've been going down. Sort of. I don't know if you've heard of the documentary series called Europa: The Last Battle. Have you heard of that? Oh, dude, I'm gonna send that to you. it's intense. It's intense, but it sort of walks through where a lot of these ideas came from to sort of get all of these cultures to believe that we are evil if we want to protect our culture, but other ones are good. So it's a very deep process. That's a whole nother rabbit hole, but I'm going to send you that link because it's fascinating. But what I was going to get at there was the cost was really high for so long. And I would say for a lot of people, it still is, because they haven't found the solutions to reduce that cost. And this is a big reason why I'm such a huge fan of Nostr. Like, I've been even more obsessed with Nostr in the last handful of months than I have with Bitcoin personally, even with the 100K madness, because I just see such a huge opportunity for people to massively reduce their cost of speaking up on things that are not politically correct, because you can't be banned from your social media platform anymore. And I think that, like, a lot of people would agree that that is a big cost for, because we're in a digital world, that digital identity is a really big deal. And our ability to share content and share ideas is a big deal. So that's why I think that Nostr is a huge, huge factor there that we should keep in mind. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go to Nostr in a second, but just wanted to tie one more thing to the Europa comment. And like, why do we have so much social energy to do things that are obviously bad for ourselves, like open borders, like pursuing communism unironically? Like, what are we talking about here? Um, and it brings me back to an interview, a very influential interview for me a long time ago, which was a former KGB agent, so a Soviet spy, Yuri Bezmenov, I think is his name. He essentially defected from the Soviet Union and sort of shared the process that he believes the KGB and Soviet Union would be trying, how they would subvert the US. And it's like a demoralization campaign that starts in schools, and they literally planned it out a generation ahead. And so they infiltrate schools, they try to demoralize us, they change us from capitalists to communists, they want all the woke stuff, right? And so and the reason is because they're sophisticated enough to know that that actually corrupts society from the inside out, which is an inexpensive way for an underdog to take over the superpower, right? Russia couldn't face us head on, but they could definitely do a long game subversion tactic. So I don't know how much of it's true or not, but it does feel like it lands. Okay, next one is on Nostr. So yeah, I've been on Nostr for a year or two now, maybe 2 years now. I can't remember how long Nostr's been around, but I'm a big fan of the intellectual idea of what Nostr is. Right? It's architected in a similar way to Bitcoin or BitTorrent, right? And as long as we can keep the economic incentives alive to host the content, which I think is yet to be determined, but let's skip that for now. Assuming we can figure that out, having an unfiltered, impossible to stop communication platform feels honestly more important than anything right now, maybe except for Bitcoin. And I think that Elon Musk is giving us a little bit more freedom, but he could change his mind. He could just start censoring the things he wants to censor. So we shouldn't rest. We shouldn't be okay with Twitter/X long term, even though I think it's gotten a little better on freedom of speech. I think the algorithm's much worse, but whatever. Yeah. So, anyways, we need Nostr. We need this communication layer. I think you made a point on digital identity as well. I think that's a really, 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 really important next step. Everyone's going to create digital identities, and either they're going to be honeypot social credit system type things, or humans own their own identity, and then they can provision that information to whatever party they seem fit. So I could port my social graph out of Twitter and plug it into Twitter too, or I could take my Instagram content and move it over to Nostr or whatever. I'm just making things up, but essentially giving people the power of exit. And if you give people the power of exit, then you essentially keep the platforms a little bit more honest, because they have to treat you like customers instead of like you're locked in the fiefdom. And so similar to Bitcoin, which I think ultimately the win is that it brings symmetry, economic symmetry between individuals and the state. We're not going to get away from states. I expect them to issue their own money for a long time, if not forever. However, we need the power to push back if we don't agree with them. And Bitcoin enables that for the globe. I think a Nostr system or a Nostr-like system can do that for information as well. So hugely, hugely important foundational block for the digital world. I also think it's a really cool experiment with private keys. So anything we can do to get people using private keys, I think is a good thing. And I think what Bitcoin and the long tail of crypto did is they made private key management at scale. And so that's pretty special. If we can do the same with information, then again, we can secure the information layer, which is absolutely crucial to have free and open society. So very important. I
Yeah.
still like being on Twitter for Bitcoin stuff though, because the no coiners, they willingly share their ignorance, and they just willingly look like fools every day on Twitter. And it's too much fun not to participate in that right now. So I'm mostly
Yeah.
on Twitter. I have a Nostr. I go on there a little bit, but not that
Oh,
much.
you'll be there. You'll be there soon, dude. For me, it was like a process of like, oh, I'd come back a little bit, then go back to Twitter, then go back a little bit. I feel like all the Bitcoiners I know that do that for a little while, they end up just going all in. I feel, I predict that you will within this next year. I think that you're going to become a Nostr Boltard with the rest of us. It's crazy. Just when you think about how it frees your mind in such a way to be able to say things, it's crazy. Because literally just now, dude, I just tried to send you a link to who I was talking to. Let me show you this. I can share my screen real quick. This is perfect. This is such a great representation of what I'm talking about. Wave tab window. So check this out. You see me? Look, I just tried to send you this link. It won't even let me send it, bro. In a Twitter DM. It says it doesn't let me. So I just go back here and it literally brings it up and says, this is spam. We can't let you send this message. It's just a link. So literally, these centralized platforms are stopping us from even communicating. And I made a Nostr post about that because that specific link to that docu-series, the Europa The Last Battle, is stonewalled everywhere. I couldn't post it on Instagram. I couldn't post it on Twitter. I tried to post it as a regular post, and it gave me, I screenshotted this as well and saved it. It says something went wrong, but don't fret, we can give it another shot. And here, I'll just share my screen again. I actually took a
No
picture of this.
way.
Yeah. So
How are they globally blocking URL, or like why?
You'll understand when you watch it.
Okay. Fair enough.
It's very spicy. So here we go. Do you see this? It says, I took a screenshot. This is from my Nostr post I made, but I've never seen this in my life. So it says, it says something went wrong. Don't fret. Let's give it another shot. And this is the Instagram error. It says we restrict certain activity to protect our community. And like every single social media completely blocks this single link to this website that just has like a 12 episode documentary. That's crazy. And this is like a super detailed documentary that just walks through different perspective on World War II, to put it lightly.
I see where it's going. I know where they're blocking it.
I highly recommend it though, because when I hear someone or like these entities like completely preventing me from hearing something, it tells me that those are the bad guys. The truth doesn't need constant blocking of everything. Would you agree that that's like a pretty decent assumption?
Yes, I agree. And the harder the state defends against your right to read something or watch something, the more my curious little shit brain is like, well, I better see what that's all about.
Here, let's see if Riverside blocks it. This is
good test.
Yeah, let's try right here. We got a little chat box. Maybe Riverside is the true free speech platform after all.
There we go.
The video.
Hey,
did it work?
Link is through. That's actually a really interesting content series. You could just take a hot link like that and do a thread on Twitter that's like, posted it in Twitter DMs. Nope. Instagram. Nope. Rumble. Yep. Nostr. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And just have like a chart of like, these are the things that actually let you say what you want to say. Mm-hmm. Do with that what you will. It's super interesting. But
yeah, it's also so, it's like we don't trust people to think for themselves. That's what it comes down to. It's like, no. We as the platform need to protect you from this dangerous video. What? Yeah. We're all children and Big Daddy Zuck and Big Daddy Google, they're in charge here now? What are we talking about? Mm-hmm. They've demonstrated they should not be in charge.
But I think that we're at the point of low trust, like you mentioned, where I think that we are far from alone in feeling this, like it's completely flipped and backfired to the point where when we're not allowed to say something, we want to say it even more because we now have the tools to be able to do that with Bitcoin and Nostr, these things that can't be taken away from us. So how do you think that will play a part in like really just pouring gasoline on this awakening process people are going through of questioning everything and just completely rebuilding their worldview?
Yeah, so I'm of two minds here. I'm the one who looks for the spicy information. I'm more comfortable than most going against the herd. I choose the red pill. I want truth. I would rather have that over this ignorance is bliss thing, right? And so for me, this is wonderful, and I'll pursue it. And I'm very happy we have platforms to get the information that I maybe want. However, at a society level, I do not think most people will take advantage of this. And I do not think it'll create a wide sweeping change in how humans consume information. And the reason is, my belief is that it goes back to evolutionary biology. So if you go way back in history, most of the time our DNA, our genes were around, we were living in small kin groups of 100, 150. During this period, that's where all our hopes, fears, dreams, desires, that's all forged there. So why do we feel sad when we don't get invited to Timmy's birthday party? Well, it's because our biology is saying, hey, you're getting excommunicated from your tribe. And if that happens, you're dead and you don't get to reproduce. There's nothing worse than ostracization. So you better figure out a way to stay socially cohesive. So that means most people are followers. Most people don't want dangerous information. Most people want to fit in, not stand out. And I think it's forged into our biology. And the leader of the tribe actually is not the safest place to be, because there's always the number two and number three gunning for that number one spot. And so most people are followers because the best evolutionary strategy is to be the lieutenant, not the leader, because the lieutenant gets all the perks, but he doesn't have the risk of the leader. And so if we fast forward that to today, I think most people are driven by that deep fear of ostracization. So if social costs are high, we just put our head down. I also think that most people just want to like believe that the world is good, and they want to just focus on their local friends and family and not really get too weird. Don't read the don't they're okay not consuming the dangerous information, right? And so I think, fast forward, put it all together, what I think happens here is that most people, nothing phases them. They don't care about money the government can't stop. They don't care about information platforms the government can't stop. And they're just going to keep on going and going. However, that middle 60% or whatever, that the herd, they actually don't influence much in society. And so what I think Nostr and Bitcoin does is it empowers the vanguard of culture to maintain this freedom for everyone else. And so as long as 50% of the Bitcoin supply is in self-custody, held by 1% of the population even, that's totally fine. That's enough to maintain the system and provide the freedoms for everyone else if they so choose to use it. And I think the same is true for information. Most people don't care. Most people won't participate, but the people who do care, if they succeed, which is Nostr, Bitcoiners, us on this phone call, we actually provide free speech for the world. And yeah, so I think it's useful for us to think about, like, it doesn't matter what the middle 60% does, and that's empowering, because you don't need to convince the sheep I don't like that word, but you don't have to convince the sheep of anything. They're not impactful in the future. So instead, go find the other lions and make sure you preserve the spark of freedom in whatever capacity for future generations. And that's all we can hope for, and that's winning.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite memes and most shared memes ever is the one that shows a lion and a pack of sheep, and it says, like, your job isn't, or our job isn't to awaken the sheep, is to awaken the sleeping lions, I think. And I love that. It's so good and definitely motivating for me, because it can be really frustrating when we do spend so many years trying to wake up those sheep that we all know. It just becomes less and less of a good use of our energy. And you just have to eventually kind of accept that not everyone's going to join this fight with us, and that's the way that life is. That's how the cards have fallen, based on the way these people were raised, like you talk about, like the boomers in general, at least the ones that I know here growing up in the Northwest, where like pretty much everyone in my region is super far left and super woke, and those boomers aren't savable. Like they've spent too many years being indoctrinated, too many decades just watching the news and just being filled with BS. And we got to move on and use these. We have these tools to awaken the next generation of people. And it's a little bit dark and brutal to think about, but like you talked about before, you're also starting to see the patterns of those people who are just following the crowd and just doing what is politically correct and going along with these, the woke ideology and even being part of it. They're not reproducing. These people, they're going on sex strike to show that they're angry about Trump, and they're shaving their heads, and they're not exercising, they're eating the soy slop, they're covering themselves with tattoos, they're doing all these things that are not going to help their bloodline. They're clearly, just pulling themselves out of the gene pool voluntarily. And so how do you think that plays into it as well? The fact that there is, definitely this I would say, like, this awakening group of people who is starting to turn the tide on all of this, using these tools that we talked about to also have more babies. Do you think that this is like a white pill moment where, like, this could be a really bright future if these people really pick up this torch that, Satoshi and Fiat Jeff have made for us with Bitcoin and Nostr and plenty of other things out there? Like, there's a whole diet and health rabbit hole. All these people are getting super into health and, getting much more involved with, building strong communities and building a strong family and bringing back the family unit. How do you think that, like, is it too optimistic to say that this could really turn everything around and create like this really awesome, badass new class of people that is able to break through this whole mess?
Yeah, I think this is a really important point. So first off, there's this pervasive view in society that is something like we shouldn't reproduce because the future is bad. We broke it, and humans are part of the problem. So it kind of takes two paths. One is like overpopulation's coming, and yeah, we need to reduce humans. And then the other side is like, the future is going to be so bad. How could you ever put a child through such a horrible situation? Okay. Package that up, hold it really tightly in both your hands, make that into a little ball and throw that into the garbage and never think like that again. I'm deadly serious. This is absolute garbage. Okay. And it's widely held. It's all over the place. They diagnose kids or teenagers with climate disorder. They're like so scared of the future. That makes me incredibly sad. Let's break this down. One, young people are supposed to be optimistic and ideological to a fault. They need to wake up every day and be like, bro, I can change the world. And they need to deeply believe that, and they need to try. Most will fail, but few succeed. And the few that succeed push society forward. That is the cycle. The older you are, your role in society is more conservative. You want to say, hey, love the energy. However, you're missing this component. Why don't you digest that, redirect your course, and then try again? And this system plays out like this. It's true in organizations. It's true in families. It's true in businesses, governments, societies, populations, whatever. And that's just how humans are. And what I see with young people mostly is a deep fear of the future. They don't think they have an economic chance. They think the climate's broken and the weather is going to be so bad, blah, blah. Add it all up and they're not reproducing. They're kind of in this YOLO mindset. Simultaneously, the money is robbing them, so they can't get ahead, right? You add all that up, and I understand why people are pessimistic about the future. And if you're really pessimistic, you deeply believe that, which most of these people do, then the idea of reproducing sounds scary, bad, or just not possible economically. Okay, so then you end up in that situation. Now, that's Main Street. That's the blue hairs and normal good people who genuinely feel like it's out of reach. Okay, so I don't want to just talk about the blue hairs because it's widespread. Then you have a group of people called the Bitcoiners. It's not only the Bitcoiners, but it's a good archetype. They have more money because they've been taught to save. They've watched number go up. What does that do? It means they're not as fearful of the future. The future is less uncertain, which means that they have more stability, more confidence today, which lets them think longer term. Thinking long term is what you need to be a good society, to create a family, etc. And so simply by having hope, no wonder why Michael Saylor put hope.com to his Bitcoin content. Simply having hope radically changes your entire future outlook. And if your future outlook changes, your present outlook changes. And so by interacting with something that gives you hope, one by one, we're unfucking the world right now, honestly. Or maybe it's the other way around, because we're going to have a lot more kids if you're optimistic about the future. So, yeah. Anyways, Bitcoin makes you
We're
optimistic.
unfucking the world with a lot more fucking, basically.
That's it. Right. Making fucking great again. And so, get rid of birth control simultaneously. So, yeah, you add all this up and you have a fork in society. The good news is I don't see very many people going from blue hair sludge to Bitcoin and then back to the blue hair sludge. It really doesn't happen. And so it's a one-way street by and large. and it's a one-way street from a really bad place to a really good place. And it does feel like that we're climbing the S curve. And if that's true and we go through a radical Bitcoin adoption cycle, I do think it'll have subtle effects across the whole world, and it will lead to more hope, more optimism, more babies. Also, if we zoom out in macro history again, tie it to the fourth turning, we're at a peak right now of fear, uncertainty, not sure what the future is. That's exactly what this period of the fourth turning is. And what the first turning, which comes next, that's the spring, that's the dawn, that's the post-World War II era defined by stability. That is the period where we have another baby boom. So if we go into this next future and we have this dawn of the Bitcoin Renaissance or a bright orange future, whatever we want to brand this next first turning, it could very easily be more traditional values, big families, thinking about the future, common sense economics, grow the pie, stability, etc. And so I think we're starting to feel that energy grow at a faster and faster rate, which lines up perfectly with the macro. Even if you had never heard of the fourth turning, but you're aware of social changes, you would say that I feel that this is coming, right? And so the macro matches the micro, which gives us a little more confidence in the transition. And we really do need to reproduce more. You look around the world, population decline is the risk. Maybe the biggest risk in society today. Maybe like nuclear war or some sort of war is probably worse, or like an actual pandemic that kills us. Maybe that's worse. But if we look at what's ahead, I think at least in the top 5, it's population collapse. We don't know what it's like to be in a society where people are going down, and it's going to cause a ton of problems. So you don't want to be in that society. We're already going to experience it in many places in the world, but it's definitely not too late for the US. So let's do our part, make lots of babies, and, buy some Bitcoin if you're not optimistic about the future, and then have some babies.
Bro, I'm not kidding. I literally tell people that. Like, even just in the last couple of days, I definitely post more content on, like, Instagram is kind of my funnel where I try to, put slightly not as intense stuff as I do on Nostr, because that's like my normie friends. I'm trying to like slowly nudge them in the right direction, post more pictures of these, women with these big families and lots of kids, and like this meme of like, oh, this is the best thing ever, because that I feel like that's starting to sort of enter the Instagram zeitgeist more. There's more algorithms pushing that because more and more people are following these more like traditional values pages. And like I get messages from people, and like girls will reach out and or they'll just like it or something, and they'll say like, oh, this is so amazing, I want this. And I will tell them like, just go start buying Bitcoin, buy Bitcoin, buy Bitcoin. Like, this literally changes, it accelerates this process of increasing the freedom for men and women, for everybody. It really gives you that longer term view because you finally have a solution to what is the root problem of the financial stress you talked about. How even people like there's so many people out there that want to build a family, but they can't because it's too expensive right now. It's like they can barely feed themselves and keep a roof over their head because inflation is so bad. And so this is really going to be an incredible shift, is like you said. Like, I really do, and Alex Svetsky talks about this too, how Bitcoiners are going to be like our own subspecies of humanity at some point, because we are so, we fit in so many of these different boxes that are all going in a really positive direction. And so the game is like, how many people can we bring into that? And hopefully it doesn't have to only be the Bitcoiners. Obviously, like, we want the whole world to get better, but if this is a strong enough, as Corey, your coworker, says, the intransigent minority is able to push the needle in the right direction, it expands outward and helps everyone. And so it's a lot to think about. It's a big, the future is going to be crazy, man. That's all I know.
Absolutely. Couple comments on this one. So I think people who get really close to Bitcoin, you and I amongst the herd here, would say that Bitcoin radically changed their lives, right? I firmly believe that. And pretty much all the Bitcoiners that we associate with would say the same. So why the hell does some money, software, digital organism, what is this thing, whatever Bitcoin is, why the hell does it cause people to radically change their lives, and in many positive ways, eat better, all these things, right? And so that's a curious phenomenon of itself. Then the next question would be, can we forecast in the future that all future adopters of Bitcoin will also be radically changed by this thing? And I've been wrestling with this for a while, and I think the answer is probably no. But let's dig in a little bit. So the closer you are to Bitcoin, the more you associate with the people, the protocol, the more you imbue those values, the more you change. But I think in the future, each marginal future adopter will be a little bit less obsessed with it. It'll just be the money they use or their digital savings account or whatever. But they're not going to read 100 books. They're not going to listen to 10,000 hours of podcasts. They're just going to adopt it in the same way that most people just bought an iPhone. They didn't obsess about the mobile wave. Most people got an email address, but they didn't obsess with SMTP versus Gopher Mail versus whatever, the protocol wars of the 90s, right? And so I expect the same in Bitcoin. I expect us to be the old heads that are, we get our little, we're not going to get credit for this, by the way. Bitcoin's going to be 100 trillion and they're going to look at the early Bitcoiners as lucky nerds. So be prepared to never get the, hey man, you were right. We're not getting those. But that's okay. It's poetic that we take money out of the state, give it back to the people, and don't get credit. That's a very Satoshian vision. I think that's okay. And so back to the point here is I don't think individuals are going to radically change their lives by buying Bitcoin. If you haven't bought in Bitcoin in 2030, you buy your first sats, I don't think you're going to be radically changed. However, what I do think will happen is a subtle subconscious shift in all of society will occur by simply having good money. It doesn't mean all monies are good and everyone's saving in sats, but on the margin, more people have a way to preserve the fruits of their labor, which means future uncertainty goes down, which means confidence goes up. We shift our thinking slightly more long-term. And if that's true, I think subtle shifts times 8 billion people will remake society in a really positive way. But it will not be, I'm a Bitcoiner, carnivore, pro-family, blah, blah, libertarian. You're not going to get the whole kit and caboodle. You're just going to be like, I feel more economically sound. Let's make a baby, right? It will just naturally occur because we're more optimistic as a society. And so make America healthy again, make America great again. That is the platform we want to transition to here. Ideally, we cut some of the baggage of Trump's personality, but I think those principles are right. We've neglected our home front for a long time, and fixing the economics, reducing globalism a little bit, reinvesting here, and just like honestly sane stuff like rational border policy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We are going to see a resurgence in the U.S. It's ours to lose. That's how I see it. We have the food security. We have the energy security. We have the best financial markets. We have the most creative people. We're going to redo all of our military over this next decade. And if we can land even a portion of that, we are going to be in a next 100 years of American dominance. And I don't think China wants that. I think they're going to push back a little bit here, but I think we're best positioned for the next period of time here. And I think part of this is Bitcoiners in America building and the sort of related industry, related energy. But it's also the U.S. government deciding that we are going to step into the future with Bitcoin. And I think the Trump administration is setting us off on the right path there. We'll see what follow through occurs. We'll see where we are in 4 more years. But I do think that I'm more optimistic about the American future than I have been since probably like 2006. I went to college that year, pre-08, was too young during the dot-com. All I knew was American exceptionalism, didn't really think critically. So I think I'm more bullish now than I was as a naive teenager, which I think is a good sign. And friends are saying the same. I'm curious what you think about that. I don't know if you've noticed a vibe shift, but it feels palpable everywhere I am right now. Maybe I'm in a bubble.
That's a good question. I would say that, these solutions that we have give me a lot of optimism. But the more I learn about the depth of the problem, I'm getting more knowledge on both sides. Just like understanding how big of a battle we have in front of us, basically, to dig our way out of the problems that are there and the negative tracks we are on. But you got to just live optimistically, though. You can't get stuck on that negative. You have to just put all of your life force into those solutions and just commit to fighting to the death for a better future for the kids and grandkids out there. I really think that's the way to go, and not get too hung up on those dark rabbit holes that do exist of the depth of the problems that there are. But yeah, I would say overall, the more people I see coming into these solutions and really just being enlightened by it and supporting it and becoming new, uh, you know, gospel spreaders, as all of us Bitcoiners are. Like right now, as I was talking about Nostr, like I'm really just pushing Nostr all across X. Like the only reason I still have an X account personally is just to show Nostr to everybody. Like I just am spamming those links everywhere to go learn more about this, because I think it really expands people's just free speech capabilities and just thought process in general, ability to communicate. So I get more optimistic the more I do that. So I'm going to keep doing that and keep buying Bitcoin. And I think that is the only way that we can go forward and not go crazy. You know, we got to just keep on fighting for a better future for everyone. And I'd love to tie this back in. I think all that context we just laid is a great way to sort of bring back into generations we talked about earlier. We talked about how, you know, you probably agree with me. I feel like, unfortunately, the boomers are, you know, I wouldn't say like totally a lost cause, but such a huge percentage of them have basically been wiped from this game board of making real positive change, because they've just absorbed so much of the fiat bullshit since they grew up during the money printer years. And, you know, all their kids went off to college and school, and they just watched MSNBC and CNN every day, and now their brains are just turned to oatmeal. And the Gen Xers, I think, are sort of a wild card. Like, where are they going to come into this? Because they feel like they've been forgotten in this like boomers versus millennials feud. So that's kind of interesting. I spent some time with some Gen Xers when I lived in Austin. There were a bunch of them in my apartment complex that were all super cool. And we talked about this, you know, like where are the Gen Xers going to come in on this? They're kind of a wild card. They could be like the forgotten hero that comes in and saves the day. Just all come and buy a bunch of Bitcoin and do that. And then the hero millennials. I think that hero archetype, not to puff up our own sales here, but based on the people I know that are millennials, I really think that that's solid. I think that our generation is really, really awesome, in the sense that even the ones that we talked about who are, you know, misguided and going in directions that aren't actually what they think they are, everyone has a pretty good head on their shoulders. They want to create a better future. They want to do what's right, and they want to do what's good. And that does leave a lot of them vulnerable to be led down these incorrect paths by the powers that be, who play on their emotions. But overall, I think that this is very positive, that we do have the hero mindset. Like, we want to save the world. And then there's the Gen Z artists, and, you know, how they are sort of more inside themselves, like a little bit to themselves. And you can see them all walking around with their headphones on. They're sort of more private. And how do you think each of these generations are going to play in the next, let's say, decade? You know, we just hit the 2025 mark. This next 5-10 years, where, you know, you would probably say that we're in this fourth turning, the early days of it now. How are each of these generations going to play in this, in the way you see it?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the boomers are split. I use my dad as an example here. So starting with the oldest cohort, the boomers are mostly open to Bitcoin more than you would think. However, there's the
You
large
also get to
cohort.
see this from your work too. You get to see people coming in and like get a real solid read of like who's
Yes.
interested in Bitcoin. So that helps you too.
Yeah, we have a ton of boomers at Swan. They love our private client services. They often have more money, so they get a rep at Swan. They get fancy research, and they really want a Bitcoin guy or girl to help them through everything. And they buy a ton of Bitcoin, and they're really, really, really that cohort's growing. And you know, they're former hippies, right? And so they used to distrust the state. Then something happened where they became the yuppies and they became benefactors of the machine. And so I think it's really just show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. And so I think the majority of the boomer population benefited from rising real estates, decreasing bonds. They had the literal easiest economic tailwinds in the history of time. No generation has had it easier. They could just show up, barely do anything, and just do the median, and they all crushed. That's not true sense. It doesn't mean that they all came out unscathed. Although they still have like 30% of the wealth in the US, it's hyper concentrated in the boomer population. So I think the median net wealth or net worth for the boomers is like 250K or something like that. That's not enough for them to live out their days. And so they're struggling. Half of them are struggling, and yet they, as a cohort, own most of the wealth. So that's kind of interesting. But what are they going to do? Honestly, they're going to be pushing for war, and they're going to be going against their grandchildren's future until the bitter end, as a cohort. Luckily, it seems like we're going to be done with them in terms of their full-on power soon, right? So we have Trump, and he won't be in power anymore. So probably next generation we'll get a Gen Xer instead of a boomer. Let's go to Gen X. These are the bad boys, the latchkey kids, independent, punk rock. Elon's a good example of the Gen Xers. And they're used to being sort of on the outside of social norms. They get no credit for anything. They're also very pragmatic. So historically, in wartime, the Gen Xers are like they're not the public facing leader, but they're the leader who does the dirty work that has to get done, and they pragmatically get us through the wars. The heroes are just bright eyed and bushy tailed, give them an M16 and a hat and go out there. And then the prophets are like pulling the strings and behind the scenes, right? And so the Gen Xers are very warm to Bitcoin. I think that they own a ton of it as a generation. You tell them that it's FU money and no one can take it from you, they're like, okay, good enough for me. Number goes up, good enough for me. I like risk. I take risk. Give it to me. And so those folks really go hard at it. The hero generation is much more complicated. So that's us. We're collectivists. And the way to get to the millennials is not about getting rich. It's about the idea that money is a public good for the planet. And it's not taking from your neighbor. It's empowering individuals to do what they want and empowering communities. So that's an important way to frame it. The hero generation also flirts with communism or socialism every single fourth turning. They're like, hey, it's not working, so it must be capitalism. So what if we do the opposite of capitalism? Maybe that'll help, which is definitely not the right answer. Never has been, never will be the right answer. But we flirt with it. Very true in the 30s, very true right now. You see a hammer and sickle, and you see unironically young people calling each other comrade and blah, blah, blah. And so the key here is to make sure they understand it in proper terms, which is just like the internet's a public good for information, Bitcoin's a public good for money. And also, if you ever want to buy a home or retire or have kids, you better start buying Bitcoin yesterday and keep buying it, because you have no other future financial potential. So the lefties must hear the social good, the right, leaning right heroes. You just tell them it's the only way to raise a family, which is mostly true. The Gen Z kids, remember, these are shy, under-socialized, emotional, fearful, etc. They're just one catastrophe away from the world ending. For those folks, you can get them on Bitcoin because it's digital and they don't have to go talk to someone at a bank branch. You can do it all from your phone. You can give it to your friends. You can do it over your social network, blah, blah, blah. But I'm not sure if that cohort's going to buy a lot of it. I am optimistic that there does seem to be like a post-woke young thing going on, where a lot of young people they like stop drinking. They don't care about any of the blue hair stuff. And they're sort of like, I'm sick of this. And they just have no tolerance for it. And I think that's a really good sign. That, to me, that's what the energy will be like, I think, in the next first turning. And so to me, that's like the preview of what's to come from young people, is they'll realize that this stuff doesn't serve them, and they'll move on, and they'll save themselves, honestly.
And something I didn't even think about there is would you say Generation Alpha would then be the next prophets? Do you think that would go along with the cycle? It's probably too early to really read them because they're so young at this point. I don't even know what the age range is, but they're like children right now. Do you think that is primed to be just the same old cycle happening again? Or what we currently have now is setting the stage for the next prophets that are still kids?
Absolutely. I think the lines are not super defined between cohorts. There's always like that transitional period where it's a little less defined. But what I would say is that the next prophet, the median next prophet that will really define the cohort will be born as soon as this fourth turning is over. And you can count the people born now. They're like the early end of that probably. But yeah, those folks will be born during stability. So their memories of childhood will be stability. It's boring, overly conservative socially. We would expect drugs and alcohol to go down in that period. We would expect tattoos to go down, obscure sexual interests to go down. The alphabet rainbow people will have a lesser voice, right? All that will change to more conservative, more traditional family values. It doesn't mean we're going back to the 50s. Like it's not gonna be like that at all. But the pendulum swings and it's going to swing back the other way. It already is. And so I expect those people to equally, just like the boomers, that when they come of age, let's say in the 2050s ish, 2040s, 50s, 60s, they're going to be pushing back on society, and we're going to go through another religious movement then, redoing the interior world. So that's what we have to look forward to.
Man, so interesting. This is going to be an episode I can't wait to just come back when I'm an old man and just listen to my old podcast episodes because we'll have some new context by then and just like how it's just so crazy to me how these cycles just continue happening. It's fascinating. It's really fascinating.
Hopefully you
And
don't come back and go, wow, Brandon was way off.
we'll see. We'll do another episode, bro. We'll be like in our 70s. It's like this could be the last episode of my podcast. It's like revisiting the the fourth turning. We'll see how it goes.
I love it. Well, if I'm super right, I'm sure I'll take a victory lap. If I'm super wrong, I don't know if I'll come on. So we'll see. Hopefully I'm intellectually honest enough to be like, yeah, I was wrong.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. I think that we're the type of people in Bitcoin world, man. Like we like being real. And it's I'm so bullish on just this Bitcoiner archetype and the fact that it's growing and we are sometimes it feels like we're not successfully helping the people around us, follow us along the journey. I know that I definitely can beat myself up about that sometimes. Like my parents have been trying for years. My close friends from high school have been trying for years, not really interested. Couple of college friends have sort of been interested, kind of still into shit coins. Like I just haven't had a whole lot of success in my very close circle. But and that's part of the reason why I spend so much energy just creating a podcast and writing content on Nostr and Twitter because there are people out there that do want to learn, and you have to just go find an avenue where you can just go hard and just let yourself go crazy and just push all this content out there and people are going to resonate with it. And someday the other folks in your life they'll either be a sleeping lion or they won't. And you can't, let that drag you down because, I think that we're building something really important here. We got to just be focused on the long game. The more that I think about this, the more that I think this really is a fight for the future of humanity. It sounds like so hyperbolic, but the more of these historical nuggets that you learn, how big of a event this is that we're in the middle of, the more it makes you think really big picture and like feel quite responsible for the future in a way. Do you feel that way as well?
Yeah, I do feel that way. I would say, yeah, let me share a few thoughts on this one. So generally speaking, earlier in my Bitcoin journey, I would say I was more obsessed with evangelizing and I felt like I had a duty or an obligation to save my friends and family. And I think what's interesting about that is if humans are well calibrated to that type of energy. So if I come in saying, bro, I got the secret to the universe, we're trained to be like, my bullshit meter is going off. You're in a cult, stay away, right? Pretty good instinct. Just in this case, we were right. We just came at it in a way that's really hard for most people to accept. And so the irony here is that we're hyper evangelists and we're right pretty much about all of it. And yet we can't deliver the message to those that we love the most. How tragic is that? And so people have the duty and we all figure out our ways around it. I have lots of little tips on like this works a little better than that or whatever. But I think from a broad messaging standpoint, we do our best and we should not feel survivor guilt by buying it and other people don't. if you do feel survivor guilt here, just stack a little extra for your friends and family. Like I buy all my friends' kids Bitcoin when they're born. And then Uncle Brandon on their 18th birthday will have a pretty nice gift that cost me like $100 in 2017, right? Uncle Brandon just paid for college and it cost me essentially nothing, right? Just foresight. And so I think that's how I've dealt with it. I also got my closest friends all own Bitcoin. It wasn't easy getting them there. And oftentimes they said no to me. And then I find out later that they say yes, but they don't give me credit for it, which is kind of how it is when you're close, right?
That is a weird thing that I've also noticed
Yeah.
that when people figure out they were super wrong about something, oftentimes they don't like properly give you the kudos that you've been telling them the whole time.
No.
What's up with that? Like, what's that psychological
Pride.
thing going? Is it pride? Like they
Yeah.
don't want to say that you won, I lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, true.
People don't want to be wrong. They don't want to admit their fault. It's natural. I actually just thanked one of the instrumental people who got me involved in 2017. Just a guy I really respected, really high achiever. And he looked at me, he's like, what do you mean you don't own any Bitcoin? Like, this is your shit. Like, figure it out. And I was like, in the moment, I was like, Jesus, come on. And then I saw a couple other things in my world and I'm like, uh-oh, he's saying it, she's saying it, they're saying it. Okay, I guess I have to pay attention here. And I actually just thanked him yesterday. You know how on Telegram you'll see like Johnny just joined Telegram. Do you see that? Because he's in my phone contacts. So I'm like, dude, Ryan, what's up? And so we've been trading messages right now, which is kind of fun. But so don't feel guilt if you do stack for your friends. That's one. The other thing is like this one's helpful for me. This comes out of the yoga world. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. Okay, so you can't lead a horse to water, but you can't get him to drink, right? Same idea. And so it doesn't make sense to hit your friends over the head with the Bitcoin standard and like lock them in a room and force them to roll dice for entropy for their seed phrases. That's not going to work. But you can open the door and let them know you're there when you're ready. And I also think a sneaky way to do it is to figure out not even sneaky, it's the right way. What are their motivations? And only to speak about that. Do not teach them what a blockchain does. Don't teach them about the difficulty adjustment or how the fiat money is a scam. Like most people will just glaze over. So find their angle and give them baby steps. That's one. The other one is I tried with my dad for a while. He was like, no. And then he listened to Robert Kiyosaki. So his generation, his language, his framing, someone he looks up to, instantly buys a shitload of GBTC. And I'm like, okay, cool, Dad. But hey, now he's up on his position. He's happy. And, that's how it goes. So that's my thoughts on orange pilling. Actually, one last one, tour of duty. I'm trying to think about how to popularize this idea. It always lands when I bring it up. Let me know what you think. But every Bitcoin journey, at least up to this point, could change, is you discover the secret of the universe. You go down the rabbit hole hard and you go like psycho mode studying a max obsession for some period of time. Then you come out of that and you go, well, I've discovered the secret of the universe. I better tell everyone. You tell everyone, totally doesn't work, totally fails. And that's usually by the top. So for me, it was like second half of 2017, start buying, goes up, I'm a genius. 2018 goes down, then I did all my studying and then I started evangelizing. But I didn't have enough context to land the orange pilling well. Okay, so that whole bear market I tried unsuccessfully and number was going down, so nobody wants to buy it. And then the second cycle, so the 2020 to 2022 cycle, whatever we call that, that was my tour of duty. That was when I was maximum efficiency, spend a ton of time reading, writing, phone calls, one-on-one, onboarded hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people during that cycle. And now I have absolutely no interest to do this. I still do, whatever. But like relatively, I don't feel the need to. I just feel inbound. And if I like you as a friend, whatever, I'll spend time on the phone with you. But essentially, I'm taking a different role now, which is like I'm not the frontline evangelist anymore. I'm more strategic and protecting my energy a little bit more. But I think it's almost, and what we're also seeing is the people who came in 2020, 2021, they're hitting their stride evangelism mode right now. And I think this serves two purposes. One, if you're into Bitcoin and whatever you listen to podcasts, you probably donate a lot of your time and energy supporting this thing. That takes a lot out of you. You got to recover. There's other things in life to worry about. So it's natural for people to step away. Point one. Point two, future adopters are not the same as adopters in the past. Okay. So I visualize this in an expanding sphere. The very early Bitcoiners, you're on the cypherpunk mailing list or you're a super nerd, you're a weirdo compared to normal society, right? And so those weirdos buy it or mine it at the time, and they're the only ones talking about it. So normal people would never know these type of folks. So they would never be like engaged with Bitcoin. And even if they did, they'd be like, yeah, I met Adam Back, weird dude, not into it. Right. But then the libertarians come and the always online crypto anarchy type people buy it. And then the vanguard of culture, but still like one foot in the matrix, one foot out, adopted in 2017. That's where I fit in. One foot in the matrix, one foot out. I think it's the right way to think about it. However, since I have one foot in the matrix, I'm able to communicate with more polite society, more normie society, right? And so that's the outside of the sphere. So now there's more surface area in 2017, and we can actually interface with a broader slice of society. Okay, then 2021 hits. Elon Musk buys it. It's on the news every day. Celebrities. All of a sudden, it's almost like anyone can talk about it now. And you need those people to communicate with the next wave of adopters because, it's just different archetypes of people and they need different messages. And that is the only way to do it. And so you serve your tour of duty at the next cycle. That's your duty and everyone does it. And that's how this thing grows. And so, that's how I put it all in context. What thoughts on that?
Agree, dude. I mean, it's just you got like I like one of the things you said early on there, how you have to just figure out what each person cares about and not just focus on nothing else with that. That is like sales 101. You have to really focus on what people care about. And I would consider myself in that cohort you talked about of the 2020, 2021 people like that are now hitting their stride, because I bought a bunch of shit coins in 2017 and like traded Bitcoin around just to, and got lucky and made a little bit of money in fiat. So I wouldn't say I was on a Bitcoiner track yet. I think that 2020 was when I really started learning about it, and then 2021 just even more accelerated. And every single year, once you like hit that stride, you just become more and more insane every year. Just talking about nothing but Bitcoin. But it's the more people we can get in that track, the better. And it's the goal is to how can we help all of these different archetypes, like as you said. And I think it's interesting because we all know these individual people in our lives who we try to help them a certain way, but you could also use sort of a general guideline for these different archetypes too. And I think that I really care a lot about helping the young people really get in on this as much as possible, because like you said, these people are in a rough spot right now, the Gen Z. Like they are constantly surrounded by noise and doomsday, despair information, doom, gloom constantly. And it kind of closes them down, like you mentioned, and they just live in their headphones when they're not in school, doing shit they hate and homework they hate. So one of the things that I think that like we really need to try to do is like, how do we angle these people to use that time of being in their own little world and having headphones on away from filling themselves garbage and just flipping it into Bitcoin podcasts or some other sort of podcast that will help bring them up to speed and enlighten them in a way. And I think that that's an interesting one that's come up a couple times on here in the last few episodes I've recorded, because I just kind of had that epiphany as I was walking through town one day, just seeing some kid walking down the street with his headphones on. Like I just know he's not listening to something that's really helping enrich his life. If he was just listening to Michael Saylor on some podcast talking about Bitcoin fixing the world and like helping the future and making energy more efficient, all these really powerful things, that would really help a lot of these young brains, because podcasts speak to them. It's not hard for them to flip on their podcast app and just listen to something different. And I think a lot more of those minds than we think would be receptive to listening to something very different than what they've heard, because it creates optimism and it makes sense. So what do you think about that? How do we help those people, the young generation, get in that direction, other than the obvious of, what I personally did was just recently, I think I brought on a guy who's 15 years old, Gen Z for BTC on Twitter. Super cool guy, really sharp. And just like having more young people on here to talk about their story for Bitcoin to kind of have that ammo to share with those folks. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one. So, two angles. One, I think podcasts have essentially won. And so, thinking about who influences Gen Z, I think that's the angle. So, hit them in the information diet. Is it the Nelk Boys or I don't even know these podcasts, but how do we orange pill Gen Z podcasters? That's all you got to do. What happens then? They get excited. They package it up in the way that the Gen Z listeners need it to be in order to adopt it. I have no clue how to speak to a Gen Z kid about Bitcoin. No idea. I think I'm okay with Gen Z, Gen X, and Boomers because I know those groups through my whole life and whatever, and Millennials, of course. But I do not know how the young kids actually operate, only intellectually. And so I think that's one angle. The other angle is getting them some Bitcoin somehow. I think kickstarts it. So I have a 20-year-old nephew. I've been buying Bitcoin for him for his birthday and Christmas for like 5 years or maybe more. So he's got it's not a crazy amount of Bitcoin, but I bought $100 a year or $200 a year or something for this kid. Now he has a decent stack of Bitcoin as a 20-year-old just from that. And he watched the number go up last cycle and this cycle, and that kind of perks his ears, right? He's not like orange pilled, but he gets the power of the money and he feels like he should hold on to it because it keeps going up. And so I think those are the two angles. They're influencers plus let them taste NGU. I think NGU drives adoption 90% of the time. And then a slight swan shill as a way to get them some corn is if you go to swan.com/card, like credit card, you can sign up for our credit card early release. So we're launching a SATS back card instead of airline miles in a couple months here. And so, yeah, instead of getting airline miles, get free SATs straight into your account. Don't change any of your spending behavior, and all of a sudden you get SATs. I looked back I used Lolly maybe 5 or 7 years ago or something now. I think it was in 2018 or 2019, something like that. Doesn't matter. I bought a bed. I think it was like $1,000 or something. I bought a bed for $1,000. They gave me 18% back. Bitcoin's 3,000, 5,000, I don't know. So I made like $180 worth of sats in 2018 or 2019 or something. Now I fast forward, those sats are worth more than the bed cost back then. Okay.
Amazing.
And so what a great example of how sats go up and dollars go down, right? The bed was free. And so point being, letting more people taste NGU in a low stakes way, I think is really helpful. Young people don't have a lot of money to invest. And I think they're bad at personal finance generally, like most people are, especially young people. And so getting them Bitcoin early teaches them the power of savings. And if you believe in savings and a balanced budget as a young person, you're going to have a much better life, even without Bitcoin. Just drilling in savings into kids is really powerful. So that's my two.
Yeah, all good points and totally agree. What I haven't really thought about is just the Gen Z specific podcasters. I'm sure there are podcasts out there that are really all about Gen Z. I never really thought about that. I definitely don't know which ones off the top of my head I would say are like the big Gen Z podcasts. I kind of just assume everyone's listening to, Joe Rogan. But, I know there are definitely some out there. So that's a good point I've never really thought of is how do we get those people orange pill, the ones that are distributing the information? And yet, maybe some of us who feel like we can talk to the younger audience well, or just the younger people in Bitcoin, like there's more and more younger folks that are in Bitcoin in Gen Z, to like really get onto those platforms and speak to those audiences. That really seems like it would be a great strategy. And so hopefully we can see that happen and get more and more young people just in this community. Because
That's right. Yeah, train the trainer, high leverage point there. And they'll do a better job than we ever could.
yeah,
The reach is already there. Honestly, I think getting the podcasters in any niche is a secret sauce. It's really effective too. If you if you get to know a influencer of any type in the early stages of their Bitcoin journey, and you see them on Twitter and they're like, oh, Scottie Pippen's talking about Bitcoin, that's interesting. If you get in with them early and you're like one of his early Sherpas, you're going to help him steer his path in a really, really outsized way. If you let the shitcoiners swarm him, like, bro, Scotty, launch your own coin, man. People love you. He's going to have to navigate that path. And so get in there as soon as you see a sign, be helpful, and help people come through the whole shitcoin hero's journey as fast as humanly possible. And then, watch their followers stack some corn too.
And I've had no more successful strategy, I might add, by getting people onto Nostr because Bitcoin is native. I've literally been like hustling the last few weeks specifically since like Elon's been censoring certain voices that were critical of Israel specifically. And a bunch of those people started coming over. I thought, oh man, this is a good opportunity because like all of Twitter is now looking at this and thinking like, oh man, this guy maybe isn't the free speech messiah he said he was. And so I've been like really going hard in like the different sub communities I spend time in. One of them is like the carnivore world, the meat world, and just trying to push as many of those people over there as possible. And I know that once they establish a base on Nostr, and I make sure they have a good introductions post, and I boost it and make sure I get all that, give them a good starting experience where they start stacking Bitcoin, then I think that it's a good way to get people in through there and skip the whole shitcoin thing that I spent way too many years doing. But speaking of, as we were just talking earlier, the Gen Z people, how do we speak to them? One of them is by not having insanely long episodes because they have very short attention spans. So why don't we start wrapping this up, Brandon? I really appreciate you coming on for this round 2 here. It's been another great conversation. Where can people go to continue to follow along your work and keep absorbing your message you're spreading?
Yeah, absolutely. From the socials, Twitter is the best by far, or X or whatever. I'm on Nostr as well. You can say hi there. I don't check it every day, but I'll respond eventually. That's the easy one. If you want to learn more about the fourth turning, there's a bunch of books. You can absolutely go buy the book from Neil Howe. We've had a lot of conversations and recorded podcasts. So if you want to go catch me and the author of the fourth turning chopping it up, I recommend it. I think the best one is probably on Swan Signal Live from a couple years ago. We broke ground with Neil. He doesn't fully get Bitcoin, so be gentle on him. But by the end of the conversation, he understood our perspective, and I think he's pretty sympathetic to the vision. He's a DC statist who believes in the institutions, and it's hard to get him to change his mind on that. But he does acknowledge the problems. He just thinks maybe Bitcoiners are too radical in how we propose the solutions. And I think that's probably fair. The early Bitcoin communities like throw the government away, fiat money is, we should never have it again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's moderating slightly as the community is larger. And so I think Neil's more on board. Slight tangent aside, I did write a long essay about the topic as we discussed, Bitcoin and the Rhythms of History. You can find that at brandonquittem.com. All my essays are there. I highly recommend the essay. I'm very biased, of course, but probably, I don't know, hundreds of people have said, hey, I read the book and read the essay. I think that most people should just start with the essay. And I agree with this. The first third of the essay is recapping the book. Second third of the essay is, okay, how does Bitcoin fit in context? Where are we? And then the last third is like, okay, if the thesis is true, how should we expect this to go? And I think if you like the essay, then you should definitely read the book. Or if you want more of the thesis. But a critique of the book is that people are like, okay, I get it. I don't need 100 more examples. So be prepared to know that that's what the book is. I personally read the first book 3 times. There's another one out. I read that one multiple times too. So I love the thesis. And the deeper you go, the more you can apply it to real life. And so it's not the only way to view the world. Last caveat, it's like an emergent bottoms-up take on how the mood is formed in society. It pairs really nicely with economic stuff. So if you have a end of the long-term debt cycle view popularized by Ray Dalio, that's kind of a top-down macro view of incentives that would change society. Pair that with the emergent bottoms-up view of this. I think that gives you a pretty well-rounded view of society. And so I recommend pairing the two. All models are wrong, but some are useful, and I think that's true here. Let's see. Yeah, that's about it for me. Come say hello on Twitter if you resonated, and appreciate the time today, Ben.
Amazing, man. Yeah, I've read Sovereign Individual. I've not yet actually read the Fourth Turning book, so I definitely need to read that. And just bring back what I mentioned to you earlier, that movie I sent you, the docu-series. Highly recommend. And for people listening, it's europathelastbattle.net. Let's see if YouTube takes the video down just for me saying it or putting it up on the screen. We'll see. But yeah, man, lots to dig into both sides. Really appreciate coming by, and look forward to maybe a Fourth Turning revisited in 1 or 2 years. We'll see how things turn out. Things are heating up out there, but looking forward to following along with all of it with you, brother.
Likewise. Hopefully, I'm not way off and I'm too scared to come back on.
We'll
Let's
see.
schedule a victory lap in 2030, huh?
Yeah, sounds good. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Ben. Bye bye.